Why is it that you find pieces of a landscape, or even an entire landscape, that's still intact, that's still visible? How does that happen? Something must have captured someone's imagination. Something must have been intriguing enough to warrant it to be preserved. But what? Hi, this is Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here in the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And I'll tell you what, I think it was a good story. You know, one of those good stories that connects people to places, that makes those places kind of special and makes the people who live there interesting and memorable. That's what I think. I think it was a good story. And here in the Blackstone Valley, we're just full of stories like that. Now, today we're in the town of Upton, Massachusetts, home of the Knowlton Hat Company, and it's a fine farming community as well. And behind me is the Stone Silo Barn, part of the Needham Hall Farm. And the Hall Farm was here for a good many years. Actually, 7 generations of Halls lived here and made this portion of Upton their home, right by Mendon Road and Grove Street. But due to growth and progress and change, the only thing left of that farm today is the barn behind me, to make that connection between the Hall family and the town of Upton. Well, the Hall family was one of those prominent families in Upton, kind of involved with everything. And one of the stories that kind of connects the Halls that I found interesting to the town was a story about Eben Hall and his sister Myra. Now, Eben built the barn behind me in 1870, but he and Myra were the postmasters in town. Now, it's interesting because the postmasters in the family didn't change regardless of who was president. When political faction was in power in Washington, Eben was the postmaster. When that changed and another group came into power, Myra was the postmaster. And the good citizens of Upton had the good service they've always used to because Eben and Myra have been running that post office for years. So it's one of those interesting stories I find. It connects the barn behind me with Postal Service and the Hall family. And that's what this episode of Along the Blackstone is all about. It's about stories, about people and places and people. So why don't you join me as we take a look at interesting ways of preserving local history by volunteer groups. Come on. Well, folks, it may catch you by surprise to learn that lotteries, you know, those gambling type institutions that are found across the United States, have been around a long time. Matter of fact, they go back to the beginning of our republic. Benjamin Franklin used a series of lotteries to finance the building of cannons for the American Revolution. And John Hancock, he used a lottery to rebuild Faneuil Hall in Boston. Matter of fact, from 1790 to 1860, 24 of the 33 states then in the Union used a series of state lotteries to finance a wide range of civic improvements. Orphanages, hospitals, libraries, courthouses, jails, you name it, the state lottery helped finance them. So it only stands to reason that sooner or later we're going to run into someone who actually won one of those early state lotteries. Which brings us to Lincoln, Rhode Island, where Stephen Smith, noted entrepreneur and manufacturer, used the winnings from his Louisiana state lottery to build this magnificent mansion behind us. He called it Hearthside. And folks, it really is a story of heartbreak and rejuvenation. Tell you what, let's go inside and see what it looks like.
Hello, welcome to Hearthside. We'll just step into the formal parlor. The lady of the house will be down in 1 second.
Hearthside has new life. breathed into it. In the 2 years since that we've been in existence, people have now come into the house, and it takes people to make a house. And we certainly have seen thousands of people come through here in 2 years. This weekend, we expect that it will be the best yet. The house is just beautiful with the amount of volunteers that have come in here and have decorated the house and brought their own personal belongings in. The house takes on a whole new feel each time we do an event. And I think that the house is feeling its warmest yet right now. We have some 30 active volunteers who are here for every single event, putting in hours and hours and hours to make sure that the event comes off as a first-class event, that people have a great experience when they come into this house. It's not just this group of volunteers that makes this happen. We have a wonderful partnership with the town of Lincoln, with the Blackstone Valley Tourism Council, with the Blackstone Valley National Heritage Corridor Commission. You name it, we've got every possible organization involved that we can to make this happen.
Partnerships are fun when they work, aren't
they? Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, because it's 2 + 2 = like 6 when you bring everybody together, and it really makes it work. We formed our organization 2 years ago. We have focused primarily on opening the doors, getting people here, getting some visibility for Hearthside. But mainly what we've been trying to do is raise money to really take care of some critical issues that are happening with the structure. If we can stop all the leakage and other things that are kind of falling apart, then we can focus on some of the other programming stuff that we'd like to do. But we're trying to do a balance right now, but kind of heavily in fundraising. We have so much history along this road. The road itself is one of the oldest thoroughfares in the country. And it was the Great Road from Providence to Mendon, Mass. And just in a stretch of about a quarter of a mile along Great Road, we have houses that go back to 1687. Hearthside is really the landmark in the Great Road Historic District. It is the jewel. It is just such a majestic building. It stands out. And I think people that don't know the name Hearthside, if you show them a picture of this house, they have seen it. They recognize the house. It is just so unique. It really looks like our own Mount Vernon in Lincoln.
Hearthside's a pretty spectacular building. I think we need to look at it and think about it in its context. You know, in the early 19th century, Stephen Smith was part of that group of people who were sort of transforming the valley. He was a mill owner. He constructed a textile mill across the street right sometime between 1810 and 1815. So really, he was one of the pioneers who were transforming how the valley worked and how things, how people lived, where they lived. And this house reflects sort of his importance in that whole context of sort of merchant capitalists. His family had lived here on these lands for probably more than a century by this time. They were engaged in the lime industry and lime rock, and in fact, one of their lands had part of their land had a lime kiln on it as well. So they were involved in that industry through the last half of the 18th century, which then leads us to an understanding of why this building is built of stone. Such a large building built of stone, so much lime and plaster used in it. It makes it a little more understandable. Plus the fact that most of the lime quarries and the kilns were less than a quarter mile away from here. His house is in this grand form of a large central hallway with 4 rooms, 2 on each side off the main hallway, sort of a very fashionable staircase. And it's clear, it has a very clear hierarchy to it as well, which is really reflective of that sort of social milieu of the wealthier classes, the genteel classes, and their servants. The front of the house, for example, is separated from the back of the house. by a solid doorway, and the finishes in the front are much, much finer than those in the back, which would have been the domain of the servants. They have their own back stair. The front hallway is much more ornate, had mahogany trim, whereas the back hallway was very, very plain.
One of the real beauties of this effort to do a historic structures report on Hearthside was the use of college students at Roger Williams University, the School of Architecture, Art, and Historic Preservation. For the kids, this was a real hands-on approach to understanding the complexities of historic preservation.
I firmly believe in this, that students should learn through real situations. And so to do research that hasn't been done before and feel like they are in fact making a contribution to an institution, an agency, a historic house, group, whatever, I think enhances their experience greatly. It was a very positive experience for all of us. It enhanced the students' understanding of what it is research is and how it can contribute to something. And we were very fortunate with the Friends of Hearthside in that they were so eager to have this work done and so eager and prepared to implement it. And so it's very gratifying to both the students and to me to see this work not just be put on a shelf and sit there for years, but in fact they were implementing some of our findings and recommendations even before we put them down on paper.
Now, John, in this lovely house, it's all decorated for Christmas. There's a huge hole in the wall. What's that about?
This is a Rumford design, probably the most modern 1830, 1840 kitchen that we can find here in New England. We have a small bake oven, a separate heat source. Sounds like a little funny to you. In a normal bake oven, you put the coals in and bake. This one, it has its own heat source, no cleaning, real modern. Next to it, we have what we feel is a stew pot, and this was a separate entity. You'd put a big pot of stew in, put it there in this circular rock shelf, and just keep shoveling coals in the fireplace, right from the fireplace through its own little hatchway, and just keep something heated all through the day. When you have family and you have visitors, there'll always be something on the stove.
That's pretty neat if you have people visiting all the time, which was a custom at this time, wasn't it?
There'd be people visiting, but also they would have to, because the stew pots opened into the other kitchens, they would have also let the people working the farms come in and eat also. And then if a visitor did drop by, as we all know in those days, can I get you something? Because they usually traveled very far to get here. This was the wilderness. When we first started to look at the different sections of the house, we kept seeing an anomaly in the plaster and wondering why it was there. And then we go in the back kitchen and we see a mass in the wall, and we wondered why that was there. And as a preservationist, you don't break, change, touch unless there's a real reason for it sometimes. So we knew we could take a panel off of the wainscoting, because if it wasn't anything, we could put it back and no one would know we were there. And we did that, and we didn't find anything for the first few hours, and some of the students stripped the wallpaper. We have 2 layers of wallpaper. We have wallpaper probably 100 years old upstairs. We actually have a swatch of it, the original wallpaper. And then we have a paint analysis of the original paint. But there was still something earlier. And it was time to make a decision, and we said, okay, let's just make a small little hole, because we can always cover it up with the wainscoting. And when we did make the hole, we moved 1 brick, exactly 1 brick size, and we could see an opening in, which meant we had to find out what the opening was. And when we found out that it was a bake oven, and it was a totally new one, we didn't know where the flue was for it. So to find out how it worked, we looked for the flue, keeping everything below the wainscoting. And then when we looked for the flue, we found out that we had a stew pot. And we said, oh, this is important now, and this is big. So we went up a little higher to check, mortar and plaster and things. And then we found the design for a Rumford design kitchen, and we said, maybe there's another one. And we opened the other side and found the other one. And now this is an important find. There are very, very, very few of these anywhere in the country.
So John, we're looking at this place, and you're telling me right in there was an actual stew pot would sit.
Right, when you see the stone shelf, the curve of the stone shelf, the stew pot would sit on that, and they would open a small door in the fireplace. And as a modern kitchen would be, they didn't have to carry the coals around. They'd just shovel some coals under it, and that would keep it hot and going and stewing all day long for the help or for guests to come in. And we still have the original paint and the original plaster inside, but there's never been any smoke damage, and that's how well it was made.
That's amazing, because you can see down here it's all nice and black, but up there it's still, the brick is pretty
Right.
clean. That's pretty remarkable. And in this side, this curved area here, what does that mean?
Well, again, this oven could have been a baking oven. It could have been a holding oven, because it's too small to actually handle a house of this size. And so on a normal bake oven, you'd put the coals into the oven and then sweep them aside and bake in it. And then when you were all done, you'd have to take all the coals out. But this is a modern kitchen. So they had a little fire off to the side, and the heat went around it from the outside, so they never had to clean it. They could just keep baking or keep food warm in it. This, again, was kind of a little more modern than anything else. If you've seen the old houses where there's always ashes and, you know, things around, this was always nice and clean and neat.
Boy, every mom would want to have this in their house, huh?
Right.
As we leave Hearthside, you're probably wondering, well, where's the heartbreak in this story? Funny you should ask. It seems that Stephen Smith, with the money he won from winning the Louisiana lottery, built this home for his fiancée, who lived all of 5 miles away in Providence. Now, Providence in the early 1800s was the center of commerce and society. And when Stephen brought his bride here to look at this wonderful mansion, she exclaimed, well, I can't live this far in the wilderness away from Providence. Stephen never married a girl. Matter of fact, he didn't marry anyone. We don't even know how many nights he spent in this house. What we do know is that people are affected differently by broken hearts. Sometimes we think that trying to preserve one single building and its history presents all kinds of challenges. Can you imagine trying to preserve and tell the history of an entire town, all 300 years of it? Well, it's exactly what the folks in Sutton, Massachusetts are attempting. And thanks to some really hard-working folks in Sutton and a wonderful partner here in the Worcester Historical Museum, we're going to see firsthand one approach to preserving a town's history.
Our theme is Telltale Treasures because we wanted the items to tell the story. And we've called it Backdoor Keys to Sutton's Past because we've really backed into the history with the items that we had. Because we couldn't really start with a timeline and expect to tell a story because we didn't know what we had to illustrate it when we started. And so when the museum kept saying, well, what's your story? How many items are you going to use? We really couldn't say for a long time because we had to back into the history. So and as we keep getting more items, it changes the story a bit. But we're just trying to find the best things to sort of give people an idea of why Sutton is the way it is today.
We've kind of fostered a new preservation ethic in town.
If it hasn't happened yet, it will very shortly, hopefully. A lot of people will probably be dragged forcibly to this show, so it's our duty to entertain them at the same time. But sometimes what museums usually don't like to do is to show something that's not in pristine condition. We're able to do that. We're lucky that the Historical Museum is letting us do that sort of thing too, because even, I'm sure, to some extent, they want things looking perfect. But it's not the same level, let's say an art museum would have to be showing pieces. So we're showing pieces directly out of attics. I mean, on homemade mannequins and the such. Just because we're not professionals doing this, it is a town sort of promotion and Blackstone Valley promotion, really. And I think it will bring a lot of people looking into these attics and things that they would think they couldn't show because they don't look so good. Now, I hope we'll look at them in a different light and say, they are important, and let them tell the story that these items need to tell to people to be able to save them. And I hope it does do that. If nothing else, it really is a goal.
My great-grandfather did market gardening, and he also, he didn't develop the Sutton Beauty apple, we all know that, but he also sold and stamped the barrels with, you know, the stencils, and shipped apples all around.
Wow, this is really fascinating to see those stamped barrel heads.
We have a whole box of these in the attic, all different kinds of apples. Baldwins, and some have 4 X's and some don't have as many X's because they weren't as good.
So the X's indicated quality?
Quality of the fruit.
Now the goal, though, is to put these wonderful little stories and these pieces of Sutton into the Worcester Historical Museum in April.
Right.
How do you decide what goes and what stays?
It's tough. You know, we started with about 300 items and another 100 or so pictures, which was way too much stuff. And so we're down to about 200 items. Of course, we keep finding things, but...
So we have to replace them, but basically we're working with the square footage and line drawings and measurements on everything, which we wish we had taken on day one, which we were told to do and didn't do, and just make them fit. I mean, it's like playing house. So you're physically trying to tell a story. We're working with storyboards like this to visually see what's appealing and little notes about them and how well a story it projects and whether we can fit it in the space.
This wedding dress, for instance, is from 1870, about 1870.
It's not as delicate, say, as a piece of wool. It's hard to believe that this had a better chance of surviving than, say, the Civil War coats in wool. But because they valued the wedding dresses, you have lots of wedding dresses. So in one respect, it's not as an important piece in this show, and yet everyone loves to see wedding dresses. So we have to, and it's an incredible wedding dress. We are steaming away, not touching it, even though it's sitting on an ironing board, we are not touching it with the iron. We are merely steaming, and because it's the weight of it, it can't hang, so it needs to lay. And so we have it. The best thing you can do is put it in a drawer, which is probably what's happened to most of them. And so there are just natural things that have happened to these pieces along the way that has preserved them.
We've learned to vacuum items by taking a piece of screening, nylon, not metal, and holding it a distance from the item, and then you vacuum the item, and then steaming is, as you said,
The moisture, we've learned, is very good for these pieces. It
rehydrates the fibers.
Well, as you can tell, this is from the Civil War. It's very old. It's moth-eaten. It was rolled up in a black trash bag when it came to us, and there were still moths in it. So the first thing that was done was it was put out in the frigid cold, still in the bag, to ensure that all the moths were dead by the time we vacuumed it. Very gently vacuumed it, went through all the creases, and then it came time to treat the wrinkles because of it being balled up. And so what we did was to place it over the back of a chair, and we would have a pillow on the inside, trying to keep the natural shape of the jacket as much as possible. And then we would use a steamer to hydrate the wool fibers, and as naturally as possible have the wrinkles ease. And it's not perfect, but it looks quite a bit better than it did when we first saw it.
Now, how did you learn that?
School of Hard Knocks, a little bit of guidance from Judy, the right tools, a little bit of ingenuity. When it came time to work on the sleeves, we rolled up towels and gently put them in the sleeves so that we could have something to press the steamer against. Doing the back of the collar, we used a smaller towel. So it was a combination of luck and a little bit of guidance.
It's not just Sutton. Boundaries, our boundaries changed 22 times. So we're a mother town to a lot of surrounding towns, or bits and pieces, including the entire town of Millbury, but Upton and Northbridge and whatever. If you get out to this exhibit and look, you're going to see examples, not well-known examples, but say of a Jonathan Sibley clock. You may be sitting on one at home. They didn't just sell them in town. I mean, it's not, I don't know of a show that's been done before that is based from the town point of view.
Now, Ruthie, when you first heard that the the folks here in Sutton were starting to collect pieces of Sutton's history. What did you think?
Well, I thought it was a great thing. I live in a house that was built in 1724, and there's things in the attic, I'm sure, that have been there that long.
The process of identifying objects and then finding out how they relate to your history is something that any community could do. And every community has something interesting about it. So, you know, this happens to be Sutton that we've done this for, but it's a process that could work anywhere.
This was an interesting item, and it's called a housewife, and it has little pockets that you can see, and it has little divisions for needles to go in, and thread was sold in twists, and it would have been stuck down into this. It's a little sewing kit, basically. And this was found by a local historian that has done a lot in our town to record and the history of Sutton. And she found this very recently with these little samplers tucked inside, and did the research. MT being Mary Tenney, and her granddaughter, Suki Phelps, probably tells a story of a grandmother working with a younger grandchild and teaching her what was essential during that time period for women is to know stitching and needlework. And yet look at how small. It's homespun fabric, hers being much nicer than the child's, but the colors are beautiful. And this was in the corner of an attic left as rags, basically, and it was just very recently found. And it's a day book and a journal of just a farmer, a day hand doing work, and we can identify by having read through this, he's working within a little neighborhood of his own, laying the stone walls around the old stone school, which is now gone, but it talks about $1 a day for laying the walls and renting his oxen out and moving the stones and helping the widow with her farming and whatever. It's just an incredible amount of history. And this, once again, is one book out of a trunk of books that we've not been able to look at yet. So who knows what else you'll find. But I mean, this will go in to say that this man who, Hiram Hicks, who belongs to this book, I mean, we never knew anything about him, and because of this, he'll have a presence in the show. And when you look at this, some people would probably say there's no cover, it's all ripped. It is incredible. It talks about buying fabric and how much he paid for 6 yards of calico, which he bought just after being married, so we found out. And he buys 2 watches in this, it's about a 15-year time period covered in this book. First one was $3, the second one was $10, which was a lot of money then. So it starts to paint a picture of the average person and how many more of these sorts of things are in our attics and cellars.
Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning with the National Park Service here at the John H. Chafee Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And you can't be anything but be impressed with the energy of the volunteers who brought Hearthside back to life again. The volunteers who orchestrated and told and exhibited 300 years of Sutton history. And the volunteers here in Upton Historical Society who have this opportunity to purchase this property, to turn it into a center of history in the town of Upton, a place to meet, a place to do research, a place to tell stories and share stories about the community. Volunteers make it happen in your Blackstone Valley, and in order to make it work, they do need your help. So folks, support those folks in Sutton, support those folks in Lincoln, and support those folks here in Upton as they have a big challenge in purchasing this property. And remember, it's volunteers that make the Blackstone Valley work. So until next time, hope to see you in the valley.